Great. So I would like to go ahead and begin our talk event for today. Just to introduce myself, my name is Kelsey Stewart. I am the Chief Community Officer at FabCafe and Loftwork. I'm joining you today from Tokyo, Japan. I deeply appreciate everybody for joining us on this, well, in Japan at least, kind of rainy Saturday. I know that everybody, has so many things they could be doing on a Saturday, and you all chose to come here and join us to talk about this really important topic of what is a smart community. And I deeply appreciate you all to take the time to hear from the guest speakers that we have gathered here today. So just a moment to kind of review about the topic and the concept of today's event. So in essence, how humans connect with each other and the environment has been revolutionized by technology. The growing pool of personal data has contributed to a rapidly developing internet. These changes also influence the physical infrastructure where we live at a faster rate than most people can adequately judge. Starting from the Internet of Things, we are now slowly switching to the focus of the Internet of People. At this talk event and at the Mini Jam tomorrow, we hope to explore the possibility of creating cyber and physical systems that are human-centric and serve the good of a smart community that takes into account not only humans, but wildlife and the environment as well. So today we are going to be asking a key question to our guest speakers and to audience members. How might we become a better informed, sustainable, and ultimately more resilient smart community? And what is a smart community anyway? We hope to question what is smart while considering how we as humans can be conscious and intentional about how we use our intelligence and technology to sustain the environment and biological ecosystem of the world. Before I go too much further, I just want to say hello really briefly to all of the speakers who have taken their time to join us today. So Jacinta, hello, thank you so much for joining us. Where are you joining us from today?
Hi everyone, I'm joining from Melbourne in Australia on election day.
Great, thank you so much for joining us. Keiko, would you like to say hello?
Sure, hi everybody. I'm also based in Tokyo. It's really good to see you all. So I'm excited to meet you in the workshop sessions later.
Thank you so much. Kalaya, would you like to say hi?
Hello everyone, my name is Kalaya from Bangkok. I'm looking forward to talk to you soon.
Thank you so much. Azby, would you like to say hello?
Hi everyone, yes, I'm Azby Brown from Safecast and I am in Yokohama.
Great, thank you so much for joining. And Akiba.
Hi everyone, I am calling in from rural Chiba, Hacker Farm, which is like a communal farm that we had started. So, hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for joining us. Without further ado, I would also like to make some mention of our organizers for today's event. So this event could not have been possible without the support of NCKU, which is a university in Taiwan. So just to give you some information about NCKU, it is one of the top universities in Taiwan, and it values holistic education, providing creative and lively instruction that combines large and small class study and emphasizes interdisciplinary learning. NCKU has devoted to align future plans with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals to optimize the application strategies of the on-campus resources of NCKU and to elevate its impacts to the level of solving global challenges with the sustainable development mindset for its strategy. I see Leslie has joined us in the Zoom today. Leslie, would you like to say some words? And then I believe we also have a short video from the president of the NCKU as well.
Hi everyone, and really appreciate Kelsey and also all the speakers today for joining us. I think it's a very great opportunity for all the students, all the participants online that to really embrace and understand how I always tell them by the time that we're trying to recruiting all these participants, I always feel like especially in campus, that we always know one thing, especially about one discipline, about one knowledge or skill set. But I would say to really create the actual impacts about social innovation and really bring change to the world, that actually you need a multiple interdisciplinary understanding, and then you will figure it out how you're going to choose a certain toolkit for you to really to tackle the challenge. So I think this is like a glimpse for us to really for the students on campus, and I hope I'm really expecting to the 4 sharings today. That super excited. Hey, bonsai, bonsai.
Thank you so much. I'm super excited too. I appreciate your message. I think that we also have a very short video from the president of NCKU, Dr. Hui Jenny Su. I think our partner Jane can share the screen to show this short video.
Can you see my screen right now? Yes. Okay. Let's go.
Good afternoon. This is
Okay,
Jenny
now?
Su, president of the National Cheng University NCKU Seiko Dagagu here at Tainan, Taiwan. Welcoming you, as a matter of fact, from the we call the Hall for the Future, and located in one of the major historical site for this campus, which began around 90 years ago. I'm told by my staff, both from the Atelier Future here at NCKU, as well as my colleague here at the Design Center of NCKU, that the mini program over this weekend would be also co-hosted or in collaboration with Loftwork Taiwan, as well as FabCafe there in Japan. So wherever you are and whoever you are, welcome. And I hope you have the best time here over this weekend. For quite a few years now, NCKU has engaged most of our efforts, both in terms of education, research, as well as a social outreach around the core value of looking into the future, especially in the era that emerging smart technology would be overwhelmingly being applied, integrated, or adapted, not only in our daily life, but also in our work and in other engagements across a very wide spectrum. So through this mini exercise, I hope people from the diversely different cultural backgrounds, people from a diversely academic backgrounds would be sort of formed in various groups. Now, as you entertain the issues of your own interests, hopefully, collectively, you bring to the table for some level of discussion that would be looking into a wider perspectives that are offered by the other participants and colleagues in this exercise. I'm sure the lecture given by many experienced experts, professional in the related domain will definitely provide you with the necessary foundation. And hopefully with that, you will be further challenged and motivated to even bring up to the entire team, to the entire activity, even a greater sort of innovation levels that beyond our imagination as we at the planning stage. So without any further ado, I hope you do make your best to contribute, participate in the program. And I have full confidence at the end of the program, you will be, it will be turning out you are the one who would be benefiting the most, who would be enriched the most. And through that, we will be looking at another possibility for the future social innovation. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. That's a very inspiring message. Yes, great. Without any further ado, I would like now to go ahead and jump into the speaker sessions for today. So today, each speaker has about 15 minutes to introduce themselves, the work that they're doing, and to try to give us some new interesting information and insight towards what is this smart community that we're talking about, and what are the kind of actions happening around the world towards this shared goal. So the first speaker I would like to call to the Zoom stage is Keiko Ono. So Keiko is a Japanese Papua New Guinean strategic consultant with a decade of experience working in the nonprofit, public, and private sectors across more than 10 countries. She is based in Tokyo, where she works with Japanese and global brands, creating prototypes towards net future positive futures, alongside building communities focused on social impact across the Asia-Pacific region, specifically in social innovation Japan, Pacific Island Society. Her career has included growing teams at Google, developing trade for governments, and researching security in civil society organizations. When Keiko is not being the CEO of side hustles, she can be found hunting rotenburo, which are outdoor hot springs in Japan, or pottering around forests. Keiko, thank you so much for joining us today. Would you like to go ahead and begin your presentation when you're ready?
Sure, thanks so much, Kelsey. Now let's see if I can do what we just did about 10 minutes ago without any faults. Okay, almost there. Just gonna share my screen. Are you able to see the screen okay?
Yes, we can see the Canva. Oh, it's perfect now. It's in full screen.
Okay.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kelsey, for hosting and for inviting me. And I'm actually more excited to hear the other presentations and to get to ask questions to everybody who's attending today. So my name is Keiko, and I thought I would just try to run through a few topics in my brief presentation. The first is going to be tied to my experiences and beliefs. So I think Kelsey gave a really great run through of my background, but I wanted to be really explicit about what that means for my beliefs and how that influences the communities that I've been a part of. And then I'll talk a little bit about how I see community building as a product, especially when we're looking at technology and how it influences it. I'll go through some bootstrapping best practices because I'm sure many of you are in the process of building or scaling communities in your respective areas. And then I'll talk a bit about juggling stakeholders as well as what is a smart community, which I guess is our big question for the day. So I think it's helpful to be really explicit about experiences and beliefs and how they influence the way that we create communities. My personal background, I actually started playing rugby as a national athlete in Malaysia, very random. But since then, I've also worked in public spaces, working on climate justice issues, as well as on farms, and then in embassies and startups, as well as big companies like Google. And most recently, I'm working with companies that I think are building the kind of future that I want to live in, such as Fermata and Fabric. I'm happy to talk more about those things at a later date. But what this has led me to believe are three things. One, I'm so sorry, there's a train above me, so if it sounds like there's an earthquake, don't worry, it's just the train. Giving you a nice urban soundtrack to Tokyo. Anyway, so the three beliefs that I have is one, I believe in a future that is collaborative versus competitive. I think we've seen through COVID the power of what can happen when things are open source or shared, or when people are actually coming together to solve big challenges. The second is that I believe the future of flexible careers is designed by polywork. So I think we're seeing huge trends both in across different generations and companies that are trying to make work a lot more adaptable with the technology that we have. And for me, that feels like a long time coming. And then the third is that I believe in a future where humanity is net positive to nature. And that's maybe a bit of a complicated way of saying that in our current system, people just by existing in the existing structures that we have are damaging nature. But what I hope for the future, and I'm sure Akiba and Jacinta and other people in this group are working on, is where humans are actually adding a benefit to nature, and there's greater synergy between the systems that we live in and extract from while contributing to. So when we think about communities traditionally, so this is a framework that was shared by the Harvard Business Review. It's a little bit dated, but I do think that it's still relevant to how technology has shifted the way that we communicate and kind of organize together. But there are three different categories that we can think of when we think about communities. One is a pool. So this is where there's a shared activity, a value or a goal. This is often tied to kind of abstract beliefs and very few interpersonal relationships. So people can, if we think about pools as political parties, for example, or people who believe in, I don't know, flat earth, which I'm sure that might not be for this crowd, but that's what we think of when we think of a pool. The second is web-related communities. So these are based on very strong one-to-one connections. So they tend to be a little bit more interdependent, and they're tied to a lot of the social networking sites that we see today. So these tend to be connected to really strong and stable relationships tied to our place of birth or our family or where we work. And then the last type of community we can think of is a hub. So this is where people are united by their admiration of a specific individual. This could be athletes, musicians. Recently, I've met certain people from the BTS army. I've never listened to their music, but I understood, what it means to be from a very strong hub. And I think what we're seeing with technology is that there's such a huge shift in the way that these three different types of connecting to people has changed. And I wanted to talk through maybe some examples in the next slide. So when I think of building communities today with technology, I really think of it as a meta product. So we are both products as well as consumers of certain community-focused spaces. And I've listed out, I'm sure many of you might be a little bit younger than myself, but for anybody who remembers things like High Five or MySpace, in Japan, we had Mixi and Line and so on and so forth. Now there's a plethora of other products that are really tied to communities. And I think that is super interesting, where, how do we balance this usage of something that is such a big part of surviving this, a level of understanding and having empathy with one another, as well as, interdependence that historically has been what has created communities, to now being incorporated into how companies are using communities as products as well as consumers. And, I listed a few of the communities that I've built in the past. I was working in one of the smallest, but I guess loudest student unions in the UK, focusing on a lot of labor union rights. And then I worked on building a community focusing on supporting small island state communities and how they're interacting in policies related to nuclear disarmament, as well as climate justice. And then at Google, I was trying to also build a community there to get more people to think about how they could influence the products that we were creating within the company in the absence of having greater direction from the US. And then most recently with Social Innovation Japan, this is a community where we're trying to create a platform for social change makers. So I'd love to connect with more people who are working in these kinds of spaces. But if we look at the types of products that, I think if we think of this as a timeline, the types of platforms that technology has allowed for us to use to scale and to grow these communities on the top, I think it's really interesting for us to think of this as a shift from sharing information and ideas to also co-creating, as well as now owning these kinds of communities and spaces. So I put Constitution DAO, which I'm sure most people have heard of in the Web3 space, where groups of people are now trying to, past tense, have tried to buy a copy of the Constitution. So, the way that technology is changing the way that we organize as people, I think is really interesting to me. And I think it reminds me a lot about how cooperatives, as well as labor unions have organized in the past, but in a very, very different way, because it's now seen as a product. So I think there were two particular questions that all of us will be speaking to throughout this discussion, but I wanted to start with how do you create a balance between what was ideal and what was practical when you're building out a new community? And again, to all of those communities that I built, they had no budget, started with 1 or 2 people. So I thought I would share some bootstrapping best practice. And this is not tied to communities that are necessarily tied to technology platforms. It could just be you and your neighbors. But I think, again, speaking to communities as products, for example, it's very similar to building out an MVP when you're building out a business, for example. But I think there are 4 things that I thought were really helpful when we were starting out with our communities. The first is to create a feedback loop. So how are you collecting both quantitative as well as qualitative data over time? And how are you using that to manage potential risks? So with technology, I think what we've seen is that you can grow a community from 0 to 10,000. You can have one employee organize something with more leverage than the entire company's budget online. And I think that's something that's really interesting and important to take into account because we're not really used to that speed. The second is to really nurture your champions. So find people who believe in your cause, even when you don't, and also have an ask when you're facilitating these events so that you can build partnerships as you go. The third is to have a really strong signature. So again, if we think about those 3 types of communities, it could be around a set of beliefs, it could be around a really charismatic leader, or it could be around a shared experience to build that web connection. And then the final one is on capacity checks. So I think, again, speaking to how technology can really scale the growth of communities, really thinking about, do you need money? Do you have enough people? Are you able to kind of manage the influx of inquiries and comments? And, it's incredibly overwhelming when a community is able to blow up. And I don't think that I think now we're trying to think about, well, how does this affect mental health, for example? How does this affect the quality of how we're able to enjoy the process of community building, which traditionally always happens over a longer period of time. So it's fairly unnatural. So as a case study, I'll speak very shortly about what we've done with Social Innovation Japan. We're a platform that started in 2017, myself and 2 co-founders. We're all half Japanese and we've all come from different backgrounds, both in public policy, private sector, as well as startups. And what we wanted to do is to build a space where different groups could connect around real world problems and try to build solutions. So in 2017, we started with a few events. And what we did with our feedback loop is we made sure to speak to everybody who came to the event and collected surveys. We found champions very early on who would kind of keep coming to our events or who would offer spaces for us. And our signature was that we were the only English speaking space, I suppose, talking about issues related to sustainability at the time. And in terms of capacity check, we were very, very grateful to have people offer their time to volunteer and to join us throughout this journey. So today we've been able to kind of build this community into a platform that creates products. So we've actually launched a company called Maimizu, which some of you might be aware of. We also provide consulting for companies that are trying to integrate sustainability into their businesses. And then we also provide really unconventional workshops to try to engage people around these topics. And then we do a lot of community building as well. And I think, just want to make sure I'm on time here, but the second question is on how do you communicate to existing and potential stakeholders? I think this one is a really interesting question when you're building out a community. And, if you're anything like myself, it tends to be a bit organic, a bit chaotic, and you don't really know what you're doing sometimes. But I think what I hope for you to kind of keep as a North Star is that it is okay. And you'll find that maybe the stakeholders that you work with change over time. For us with Social Innovation Japan, we've made this such a broad platform that we work with governments, we work with companies, as well as with civil society organizations. And the real key that we're trying to provide here is to understand how can we foster collaboration across these different groups by thinking about it as resource distribution. For example, governments might have better expertise on the latest science and obviously policies that are needed, but then companies might not know how to disseminate that or integrate that into their companies. And civil society organizations that are on the ground can really help us understand what does it look like operationally to sustain this. So I think of converging stakeholders around resource distribution as a really powerful way to bring people together. And another thing, particularly in Japan, is this concept of thinking about talking to stakeholders with opportunities to learn. So one of my mentors and favorite people in the world, Tom Chi, talks about the difference between nouns and verbs. So there's a physiological difference when you say "I know" in your brain. That is very restrictive. It's there to maintain existing information that you have, it's more of a protective barrier to say, I know. So your brain doesn't grow. When you're learning, on the other hand, when you're thinking about nouns as verbs, you're actually expanding and growing new neural platforms. I'm sure there are people in here who can speak to this much better. But let's take, for example, if you were to look at a piece of metal as a noun, it's just that. As a verb, you can break it down into different processes. This piece of metal was mined out of this piece of earth, which was then shipped by this company. And so, you know, as scientists, which I understand the majority of this audience is, breaking things down into processes and thinking through things as a process of verbs with stakeholders is actually really refreshing, because you're providing them with information that's new and interesting, and it just helps people be more curious. A second tool that I'd like to recommend is to have a decision-making matrix. So depending on which stage you are within your organization, you'll have certain priorities. And I highly recommend building this out as your team grows in particular, because you'll have situations with stakeholders where you won't be sure how to say yes or no. And I'm happy to kind of share this a little bit later if people who are interested in having something to ground decision-making with your teams. And I'll end with this. So when we think about smart communities, we can think about all the sexy technologies, especially now with Web3. And I think just a lot of what makes tech appealing with communities is that you can scale things. But what exactly are we scaling when we're, you know, integrating technology into community building? And for me, it's really about thinking about how are we influencing how power dynamics between people and groups to make it more equitable. And there are three things that I think makes a really smart community for me. One is that it fosters greater agency for community members. This is often done through co-creation, for example, for people to actually contribute to ideas. The second is that it's opening up access. So outside of your day-to-day work or education or family, how are you providing and facilitated learning beyond the things that you're used to create that expansive kind of thinking? And then the third is that you're creating connections through shared experiences. And there's an entire industry that companies are really vying for. I mean, you can look at Airbnb and their experiences things, but you know, for a community to provide something that's shared is really powerful. So I'm going to end on that note. Sorry, maybe I rushed a little bit, but I'm really excited to hear about your communities that you're building and to think about everybody's thoughts about what makes a smart community in the discussion time. So I'm going to stop there and pass it back over to Kelsey. Feel free to get in touch. If you just type in Keiko, oh no, I'm probably the only half brown person. So yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Keiko, for that incredibly insightful presentation. I always learn so much from you every single time you present, especially the point about thinking about nouns as verbs. There's somebody who wrote a book called The Art of Gathering, and she says the same thing about diversity being a verb. And so yeah, it really, touched home for me for that. Thank you so much for your presentation. Great. Next, I would like to go ahead and bring up our next speaker, Kalaya Kovidvisith, who is the co-founder of FabCafe Bangkok. So to introduce Kalaya, so Kalaya is, as I mentioned, co-founder of FabCafe Bangkok and also the managing director of FabLab in Thailand. Kalaya holds a master's degree in design and computation from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. Her research interests focus on the digital fabrication and biotechnology, how it reinforces the changing relationship in industry and creating the new business models for the next design generation. Kalaya is a Global Entrepreneur Summit delegate of 2015 and Asia Pacific Weeks Berlin 2016. Kalaya, thank you so much for joining us. Great. Hi, Kalaya.
Thank you, Kelsey. So can I share the screen?
Please go right ahead.
Okay. So first of all, I would like to thank you for everyone to join us today. And I will try to do my best on the presentation within the 15 minutes. Okay, let's start. As you already know that I'm the co-founder of FabCafe Bangkok, the space that initially we want it to be a place for everyone to work together, to share, and then to build a new things together. Yeah, so that's why the main task for our team is that we have to try to curate many people to join our space as possible. Yeah, so today I will mainly focus on about how to create a structure for people to work together. It will be separated into 3 issues. The first one is the system. The second one is about the node. And the third one will be about the bridge. Yes. So as FabCafe Bangkok, we normally work with innovators and early adopters, meaning that we work with closely with educators, professors in universities, people who invent something around the world, so that we can work with them and then try to design their solution or application for the market. Yes. And then for the FabCafe ecosystem, initially they already built the system that try to gather local creators, like through Fab Meetup, through ideation and hackathon. And then after that, we will bring them onto the global level, which we have UFab competition award that we host every year. And then when we know them globally, we will bring them into the ideation and hackathon global platforms. So this is like how we curate creators around the world. Yeah, so this is like the sample of creator in Thailand, in Bangkok. We lucky to have to know them, and then they use our space to create their works. And then at the beginning of FabCafe in Bangkok, not many places like this in our country. So that's why many universities use our space as their school or classrooms. And then they learn with us like through semesters. After that, we have the Fab Meetup. Fab Meetup is like a talk event that we ask people in our community to share their projects and then inspire within our communities. And then we will use that Fab Meetup to learn about new people. After Fab Meetup, normally we will host the hackathon. So if we want to know someone from agriculture, we will host like something like farm hack, so that we will draw in farmers to work with our young designers. Also, we realized that money is important, funding is important, but also the authority is also important as well, especially when we work with environment or social issues. So that's why FabCafe, recently we work with government in many projects. Not only aging economies, but also alternative renewable energy as well. Yes. So this is like the whole system that we have for FabCafe. For local, and then for the global, we have UFab. You can check it out. With the UFab things, I think that you can see the trend of how young new creators use design technology to create some things. The second story will be about the node and bridge. Yeah, so within the communities, as you know, that how can we find innovators and early adopters? Yeah, so within FabCafe Bangkok, we try to separate people core into 4 groups. The first one is about people who working with knowledge and like practicalities, and then people who work with new venture like innovations, and then try to bring new things that never happened before. So like this kind of 4 things, we will like try to collect people in that area, and also we will see like how we can bridge them to different level, like for the community in overall, or to incubate something new, or maybe they already have it and then they need someone to accelerate their business. Recently, I learned about Node XL, and then I think that you guys, if you guys are interested in this, you can try to use it. Professor Mark Smith, sociology from UCLA, he is like a very genius in this field. He tried to use Node XL to identify influencers. Yeah, so like Neil Patel, they also try to use Node XL to differentiate the type of conversation in Twitter. Or Paul Krugman, they try to differentiate whether that influencer is the hub or the bridge influencer, because those guys are different when we want to work with them in different projects. Yeah. Another diagram that I normally use with my students is that before we work on the project, we try to create this stakeholder diagrams. So like how many people that we will engage during the whole process. So it's like we might need nonprofit to come and help with us, or we need venture capital, we need companies, we need university to be engaged in our project. So we have to find them and then asking them whether they want to join us. Yes. The third one will be about the bridge. So the bridge thing is more like the exercise for us, even in FabCafe Bangkok. So there are 4 types of co-creations differentiated by openness of the ecosystem, and another one is about the ownership. So I will try to explain different types through the project that we did in Bangkok. The first one is cloud. Normally for this type of thing, we open for everyone to join, like the waste, anything related to waste in Thailand. We work with precious plastic in building the machines, and then we invite people who are interested in turning waste into a product or service. So they can come and learn, and then they can make something out of this by themselves after they learn with us. And then sometimes we also try to create a project so that they can get involved. Like the recent one, we do the waste surfer thing that turns like impossible waste in the agriculture or exhibition and turn it into a surf skateboard. Yeah, and then we work together. We have professors to come and teach us how to deal with different type of materials. Yes. The second one is about the communities. This model is more like people who are interested in specific issues, but about the ownership, they will just like initiate the idea. They didn't like invest in it. Yeah, so normally we will use ideation and hackathon platform to curate this kind of co-creations. The sample that we will show you today is about the farm hack. As you know that farmer in Thailand is very poor, and then sometimes they need to spend a lot of money to buy a machines. That's why we ask young engineer and young designer to come and then work with the farmers in order to try to design, create a new open agriculture tools that make it workable and also cheaper. So this is like a sample that we make. And then the goal of each hackathon is that we want the prototype, at least prototype for farmers or participants to be able to use it in their real world. And then is it be able to use, then we will try to find the funding to manufacturing it. The third type will be about the club. The club is that we kind of like a select participants, and then sometimes they will bring in the grant and funding to join us as well. So this is a project that we did during the COVID-19 in the first year that we don't know what is COVID is. So people in Thailand, they are very afraid, and then we are lack of many medical tools. That's why doctors and nurses, they come to FabCafe and then ask us whether we can help them design and prototype it and maybe connect to the factory as well. So there are many collaboration model happen during that time. Like the first one, we find out that we don't have the material that we can use for the HEPA filters for the patients. So we try to find the material through TCDC, Thailand Creative Design Centers, and then we ask them to refer us to the companies that sell the materials abroad, and then that factories work with us in order to make the filters and then send it to the hospital. The second one is that to develop to 3D printing. This one is very simple. So at that time, people sharing the 3D file, and then they need us to manufacturing it. So we work with all the maker that we know, also the 3D printer, cellular machines as well. So we distribute the file, and then we try to QA, QC it, and then before send it to the hospital. The third model is that we have so many participants in the project, collaborators in the project, and then we need government agency to approve the things that we invent to make the patient safer. That's why we need to work with the university and ask university to connect to the government agency. Yes, the last one will be the coalition. The coalition is basically the project that we already assigned who will work with us. This one is the project that we would like to design a new way to collect garbage in Khon Kaen city, northern east of Thailand. And then we find out that although people over there are scared of the technologies, but they are very comfort to dealing with the pets. So we kind of like bridge them together, turn the robot into the pet type of things. And then we work with the local people and then try to investigate the way we the way they collect garbage. And we saw that there is a gap between a government agency and also the local. So we designed the cat Bun Bun to bridge the gap so that people, the government and local people can work together on making a better waste collecting process. Yes, so this is like the output of the project, and this is all that I would like to share for today. So if you have any question, you feel free to talk to me, and then this is my email. If you want to contact or work with me in the future, you can reach me through this email as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Kalaya, for your really great presentation. I was kind of glued to the screen for a moment there. Something that's always impressed me about the projects that Kalaya is doing is this capacity to go from hackathon, where the users or even the experts of that field are being put in the driver's seat to design the solutions that they themselves want to be using. I saw this happening whenever COVID-19 first hit, the fields of Bangkok and also countryside of Thailand. Kalaya was going in, and as FabCafe, she's already established these very multi-layered connections and networks with different kinds of stakeholders, and seeing the kind of products that she could develop hand in hand with doctors, nurses, and other professionals, who might not have ever collaborated together before. Just because they're working in the same hospital doesn't mean that they've ever really had any kind of meaningful conversation before that opportunity. So anyways, always very exciting to hear the updates coming from Kalaya and FabCafe Bangkok, and thank you again for your presentation. Next, I would like to bring to the Zoom stage is Azby Brown. Azby Brown is a writer, Safecast researcher, leading authority on Japanese architecture, design, and environmentalism. He is a native of New Orleans and has lived in Japan since 1985. He is a leading authority on Japanese architecture, design, and environmentalism, and the author of The Very Small House, Just Enough, Lessons in Living Green from Traditional Japan, and the third book, The Genius of Japanese Carpentry. Since the Fukushima nuclear power plant disaster in March 2011, Azby has been a lead researcher for Safecast, a highly successful global volunteer-based citizen science organization devoted to developing new technology platforms for crowdsourced environmental monitoring, which promotes open source and open data principles. In his writing and media appearances, Azby offers a credible, critical, and independent voice to counter partisan talking points. Azby, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to see you.
Thank you, Kelsey. I'll just go ahead and share my screen.
Fantastic.
And I'll try to be aware of the time. Do you see it now? Is it visible?
Excellent.
Slide. And does it advance correctly to the next one?
Yes, we're good.
So Safecast began immediately after the disaster in Japan in March 2011, and it's called Santen Ichi Ichi 3.11 in Japan. And of course, this was a large earthquake and a massive tsunami, which led to a great loss of life. And within a day after that, a disaster, a meltdown at Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant began. There was a great lack of information, a huge information vacuum regarding the spread of radiation, the the officials, the authorities, scientists, media, all sort of lost the trust of the public. The people who ultimately formed Safecast, started to aggregate data and trying to find, sources of data, but ultimately decided that we would have to develop our own devices and make a mapping system online and then build a community of people who are motivated to collect the information, a citizen science community. And it began without a lot of pre-planning. It was deciding at every step along the way what the next step should be based on this sort of, guidance of our ultimate goals. One thing we've learned, and we stress every chance we get, is that trust is not a renewable resource. Once anyone, officials, organizations, institutions have lost public trust, it's almost impossible to regain it. We see this time and time again, and we believe that there can be no trust without transparency. Transparency, openness, the ability for people to evaluate on their own what the findings are, what the information is, where it has come from, how valid it is. This is essential. We developed quite a lot of tools, a series of radiation monitors with GPS and data logging, which we call the B-Gaigi, and B stands for bento because they fit in these pelican cases and they look like Japanese bento lunchboxes. This was the one called the B-Gaigi Nano, which was the 7th one we developed, I think. It has stayed in use the longest. There are thousands of them out in the world being used. It's a very high quality device. And again, basically you turn it on and it makes a map of radiation levels. And again, we're open. Everything we do is open. We try to set an example of best practices for openness in every aspect of the hardware designs, the software designs, the database itself, and in our other communications. We think it's essential. We now have over 160 million data points in our radiation database. It's the largest open database of radiation, anywhere larger than what most countries provide. And you can go to map@safecast.org and see our map. You'll see there's some areas like North America, Europe, Japan, certainly other places that have quite a lot of data, some places that do not. And there's a lot of interesting conversations to be had about why. So Japan, of course, we started in Japan because of the Fukushima disaster. Japan is very, very heavily mapped, detailed map, again, mapping the same places repeatedly. In East Asia, in general, we have, for instance, a lot of data from South Korea, and we have a lot of data from Taiwan. And both of these have been spearheaded by FabCafes and our networks through there to look at Taiwan itself. Again, the major cities, Taipei, Tainan on the West Coast, a little bit less information from the East Coast. We also have a real-time sensor in Taipei. And again, Tim is been really a key person in helping usher our project along there. In Europe, again, lots of densely covered countries, Germany, the Czech Republic, where we have a very good official partners. Actually, the National Radiation Laboratory of the Czech Republic has been very involved. They have about 40 B-Gaigis, and now they're developing their own compatible device. They've become key, volunteer network for us. I want to show a map of Uppsala in Sweden, which is a university town in Sweden. This entire town was mapped by one person who's a researcher, and he would just choose his bicycle path to and from the university every day in ways that allowed him to cover the entire town. It took about a year, but this shows that one person using our device can actually map an entire city. So this is really the power of our system, of the whole notion of open source, very simple device that allows anyone to put their data into the public domain. Initially, I think everyone involved in the project thought that the hardware, the software, the database, all of the nuts and bolts would be the most challenging part. But of course, it was building the community and maintaining the community. And this has been a great learning experience for all of us. We have a very, very broad spectrum of stakeholders. And I really, really appreciate how Keiko described these issues of sort of coordinating and balancing the needs and desires and motivations of various stakeholders. People from all walks of life, have participated in many nations around the world. And that communication and support has been really the most important thing. One of the initial communities was Tokyo Hackerspace. And this is our volunteer Joe Ross, and in the foreground, and another volunteer, and they are, basically hacking things together. Initially, it was very, very rough and gradually became increasingly sophisticated and reliable. But basically we said, yes, if it works, we'll use it. In addition to the maps of radiation data by these mobile sensors that you put on your car or on your bicycle or stick in your carry bag, we also have a real-time sensor network, which has also been evolving. And now we have about 17 real-time sensors around Fukushima Daiichi. In Japan, the largest independent real-time sensor network, we think anywhere for this sort of thing. We have an equal number in other parts of the world, but in some places we would like to have them, we don't. The latest device we use for that is called the SOLARCAST NANO, which is solar powered. It has a cellular modem. We've been using them since 2017. We also have an air quality project, a series of devices, prototypes, etc. The most, I think, one of the greater impacts we had was in the Southern California fires in 2018, where a lot of our devices were in use to help monitor the smoke, influence there. And again, we look for opportunities for that. Our newest device is called the AIRNOTE. It was developed along with Ray Ozzie, who's a brilliant engineer who developed something called the Note Card, which is a cellular modem, which is prepaid and can be used in many, many countries around the world just out of the box. And these were announced and deployed in conjunction with our 10th anniversary last year in March 2021. Very, very simple device. Again, as part of the community thing and the human side, we realized that education was very, very important. We initially started by, people would buy a BGeigy Nano, which is a kit, and they'd want help assembling it. And we'd wait till they had a bunch of people who needed to do that. And we'd have a little workshop, 5 or 6 hours to do that. And gradually that became a more important part of our activity. And it's essential, in fact, to the communication and building understanding and building the community. And we'd have them at schools, high schools, universities, with other groups, with social groups, people of all age ranges, and eventually develop workshops that could be done with elementary school children, and again, workshops overseas as well in many, many countries. We talked, there's a lot of discussion about the Internet of Things, and actually Kelsey touched on it at the beginning. We talk about the Internet of Nothing and the fact that if your system is very device-centric, if the company or organization or whoever is supporting and building that, if they go out of business, they get purchased, they decide to simply stop supporting it, then you've got a brick. And we think that our approach of really focusing on the community side makes it very, very resilient to any kind of technological changes. So we look at this as a very, very important lesson, because we've seen lots of other projects that ended up with sort of bricks. And our structure is fairly, it's a network, but it's not really hierarchical. There is sort of a center. There's sort of people who've stuck around for a long time and are, a bunch of us who are really doing the key operational things, but people come in and go out as they need to. Some people are very peripherally involved. They're simply gathering data. We never meet them. Some people show up for events and help and cook and play music. Other people are involved on particular teams or projects, the software, the database, other hardware things, but it's very, very elastic, and it's an ad hoc network. It was never really designed, but it's, again, proven very, very resilient. It sort of has a core, a weighty center, again, of the people who are very, very involved and committed. But other than that, it's very, very elastic, and people come in and go out, and it works that way. The other thing is that from the beginning, it has been largely a virtual community. In other words, people don't need to be in the same place. I showed Tokyo Hackerspace. There was a lot going on where it helps that people are together to do this stuff, but otherwise it's all happening online. We use Slack extensively, and basically when the pandemic happened and it was difficult to meet face to face, well, that made it difficult to have workshops, but the rest of the project continued because it was always virtual. And this has been a great strength for us. In terms of outreach and community, our building of a network among experts has been very, very helpful. We've done workshops. This was a workshop in the ICTP, International Center for Theoretical Physics, which actually I think Akiba knows very well, and bringing experts together from developing countries. So 30 people from Africa, Latin America, Middle East, and teaching them about network sensors and through the Safecast project, and using it, and then they return to their countries and they're providing data. And this kind of network has proven to be very, very important for things like during emergencies. to find out what's going on and what the experts, what they are finding. And one thing I will stress, that we never really reach out to these organizations ourselves, but we find people within them who share our values. Whether it's in Japan or in Europe or in the United States, they share it, they get the openness, they get the need to sort of develop a different approach to their data gathering and public communication, and this becomes very, very helpful. At one point, TEPCO openly allowed us to come gather data at Fukushima Daiichi. We had data already from journalists and others going onto the site and gathering data a little bit surreptitiously, but they said, come on, do it openly. We are not afraid of that, and we have a lot of data from Fukushima Daiichi before and since then. Well, a big thing happened, as you know, in the end of February this year. Russia invaded Ukraine, totally unjustified invasion, violation of sovereignty, and as part of that, they invaded the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. This was shocking. First, a breach of every norm of radiation protection, of every international agreement, and shortly after that, they attacked the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant with tanks and shooting at the buildings in the nuclear power plant. Shocking, again, a shocking unprecedented breach of safety and security. After the Chernobyl power plant was invaded, the government quickly announced that they had detected radiation spikes at the official monitoring network, and that network quickly went offline. So we were inundated with requests for information from journalists, from experts. Do you have any information? Do you have any information? Do you know what's going on? And we had to say that we had a lot of data from Chernobyl from previous years before this war started, from our BGIG network, from people who went in as researchers, as journalists, or as tourists gathering information, but we had nothing current. We had no real-time sensors on site in Chernobyl, but we started to work a network very much with people in and out of Ukraine to try to find out what's going on. And we got to know the people at an NGO called Save Dnieper. Dnieper, of course, is the important river valley and a town, and they run a site called Save Ecobot, which initially they were aggregating air quality data. And then, as an afterthought about a year ago, realized there was a lot of radiation data available to scrape. They're scraping from the government sites and other sites and putting it on their own maps. They ended up having the only available publicly available radiation monitoring data for Ukraine for quite a long time. In the slight pale orange area in this map in the center, this is the Chernobyl exclusion zone. It's now offline again, but for a while they were the only ones who had that data. And even the Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian laboratories, the Russians basically sacked and looted them. They stole the servers for the system, and there was no backup. So this NGO has the only backup. So they have been essential. We've worked with them very closely, gotten to know them very well. We share similar aims and similar approaches. And we had, I think, we're able to offer them some insight in our experiences in terms of working with government and how to communicate with them, and the suspicion that they would first experience. And of course, there was a lot of that. And eventually government asked for their assistance. So this has been a very, very important thing we're doing, writing about it, tweeting about it. What do you do when you can only get piecemeal data, when you don't have anyone on site? And then we were working, and here it is, the data is out of date all through Ukraine. This has been a big issue. So, what do you do? How do you find the information? It brought us into closer contact with the open source information community, so-called OSINT, people who are using open source data to find out what's going on environmentally, militarily, and other things, and developing very good trusted networks in that way as well. April 3rd, the Russians pulled out of Chernobyl. People could get back into the site. There was a famous drone video showing these trenches that the Russians had dug, and there were a lot of reports and rumors that they had radiation sickness and what was going on. So quickly we geolocated that, found out where exactly that was on the site, found information, previous data of radiation levels. This is from a recent research paper by a team led by Professor Beresford, who's in the UK, which had a very good map of radiation of cesium. And well, the site where they dug was really, really stupid and dangerous, but not as stupid and dangerous if it had been just a few hundred meters further south in the middle of the Red Forest. So there is high radiation there, but not very likely to give them acute radiation syndrome. And finally, we got data from Chernobyl about a week ago from a Ukrainian researcher who's working on a project to monitor feral dogs in the area. And this is we reached out to our research network and said, hey, we know you're working in Ukraine. You guys, if you can get back in and get data, it'd be very, very helpful. Well, it doesn't show where the trenches were. He wasn't able to get that far, but it basically shows no big changes since before the invasion. And again, a lot more data needs to be gathered in order to get a grip on what's going on. And we've been approached by research organizations and by the Ukrainian government to help develop radiation monitoring plans for the Chernobyl exclusion zone moving forward. And we're very, very looking forward to that. And we're getting more detectors into Ukraine to assist with that. So I will point out that, the advantage of open data in our system is that we were able to get data for the public out of Chernobyl before the IAEA or anybody else. And again, this is, not to boast that, we're great or something, but just to show if you build the right kind of system, it is able to make that sort of thing happen very, very seamlessly and without friction. So I've gone a little bit over time. I apologize for that. That's the end of our presentation. We look forward to hearing from you. I look forward to the discussions with everybody else. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Azby, for your presentation. There's just so much to respond to for this one, and I really look forward to seeing the responses from the participants in the breakout sessions for a question and answer later on. Yeah, everyone, if you're inspired by this talk and also by the talk of the previous speakers and the upcoming speakers, we'll send you all some list of links so that you can follow up with them as well. In particular, I know in the case of Safecast, they're always looking for interns and volunteers. Oh, sorry, I think I was speaking a little bit too loud. Interns and volunteers. So if you're curious, okay, thank you. So if you're curious about the work that Safecast is doing, then I highly recommend to you and I highly encourage everyone to reach out to them. I think, Azby, maybe you're still screen sharing. Is that right?
I think my Zoom is frozen, so I'm going to quit out of Zoom and rejoin.
Okay, excellent. All right, thank you so much.
A moment.
Excellent. Great. Thank you very much, Azby, for your presentation. The final presentation for today is going to be coming from Jacinta Plucinski, as well as Chris or Akiba Wang, who are co-founders of FreakLabs, Wildlife and Environmental Conservation Technology. Jacinta is a content and software developer specializing in web technologies. She's also a published author. She runs her own book and games publishing company and has started her own magazine. She's worked for Google, SCMP, Discovery Channel, Australian Centre for Moving Image, and Special Broadcasting Services. She's studying ecology, and when not working on technology or publishing projects, she plays the harp or D&D and goes hiking or typing. Hi, Jacinta, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Next. Thanks. So Akiba is also founder of FreakLabs, which is developing Arduino-based hardware for wildlife research, environmental conservation, and basic infrastructure in rural and remote areas. Akiba has a background in electronics and product design and has been designing circuits for the past 25 years. His experience spans IC and FPGA, firmware, and hardware design to manufacturing. His specialty is in outdoor wireless sensor networks and has been working on it since 2002. His work has gravitated towards technology for environmental monitoring and is now working on wildlife conservation. Hi, Akiba, thank you so much for joining us.
You're on.
Yes.
Great, and I think
hello,
that
everyone.
today, hi, Akiba, thank you for joining us. I think that today Akiba is joining from Japan and Jacinta is joining from Australia, is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining. So I'll go ahead and let you guys begin. You have about 15 minutes for your presentation.
Okay. So let me just get the thing. Can you guys see this okay?
Yes.
Okay. Oh. Hi, everyone. I'm Akiba from FreakLabs. 大家好. Actually, it's a pleasure to talk to all of you. My father was a graduate of NCKU over 6 decades ago, so I'm really happy to be here.
And I'm Jacinta from FreakLabs, and today we'll be talking about some projects that we work on, how we would define a smart community and how we try and build smart communities within the projects that we work on. And we'll also discuss some of the challenges and throw some challenges out there for help.
So first of all, who are we and what do we do? FreakLabs develops hardware and software for wildlife research, environmental conservation, and international development. We work with, we work with individual researchers, ecologists, and local grassroots organizations, as well as larger research institutions and universities, NGOs, and global organizations like the World Bank and UNESCO. Our work takes us to the mountains of the Himalayas, remote deserts of South America, and rainforests and jungles around the world. And it means that we interact with a lot of different communities. We're also co-founders of Safecast, of whom the amazing Azby Brown just gave a talk. So sorry, Jacinta?
We also run a company called Zoot Creations, which focuses on creative media, such as incorporating technology into board games or card games, interactive books and dance technology. So we're working with a lot of dancers, a lot of writers, illustrators, and other art and media creatives.
In 2012, we started Hacker Farm. It's a community focused on the intersection between agriculture and technology. We set up a hackerspace in a rural part of Japan and worked on issues around agriculture, water, sustainability, and food. One day we were approached with a proposal for a project. So water levels in the rice paddies needed to be constantly checked. Many of the rice farmers are quite old, in their 70s and 80s. Checking the rice paddies every day was quite difficult for them since some of the paddies were quite remote. They're inaccessible by car and they required an uphill climb. So we came up with an idea to monitor the rice paddies wirelessly and inform the farmers of the levels either by a website or by phone call for those that didn't use computers. And there are actually quite a few of them out here. This became a collaboration with a company called Digital Garage. They're a venture firm in Tokyo who are interested in agriculture technology. For this project, we monitor the water depth using sonar sensors and would notify a farmer if the water dropped below a certain level. This is often due to animals that would break the rice paddy walls or natural evaporation of the water. So this saved the trip out every day to check the paddies. So interestingly enough, after that project, we were contacted and started working with the International Rice Research Institute in the Philippines on what we developed. So they're researching a new technique for growing rice crops called alternate wetting and drying. So this technique allows rice to be grown with 40% less water, making rice growing in arid regions possible. This is becoming more important as global warming reduces the amount of surface water available for rice farming. So this technique relied on accurately measuring the water depths and irrigating only when it reaches certain levels. And using it, it's possible to feed millions of people in areas where it was previously thought impossible to grow rice.
Another project we're working on is a remote soil monitoring system. Ecologists, farmers, and the wider community are becoming more and more aware of how soil health is critical to the health of what's above the ground. So the plants, the animals that feed on the plants, and the general ecosystem. However, we don't know a lot about how it works, how it's built, and also all the little interactions of all the microcosms and bacteria and mycorrhizal fungi that's in there. So it's fascinating. But in addition to this, with climate change, ecologists in Australia are anticipating much hotter and drier conditions. And so they want to understand how to build more healthy soils, to build more resilient ecosystems, to better survive these harsher conditions. And they're looking at how they would be able to use the health of soil as a way to indicate how effective their conservation management practices are, but also to see when an ecosystem is going into a more distressed state for due to drought or hotter conditions, so that they can take early preventative action. So the basic idea of the system is to have a sensor station that monitors a number of soil sensor properties remotely. That includes pH, moisture, temperature, salinity, and CO2 within the one device, that then sends this to a gateway, which sends it to the internet and then is viewable via a web app. And the idea is to create a long-term baseline of soil data that can be used as indicators for soil health and therefore help determine what management practices are more effective and, as I said, when a system's going into distress. And the timeframe for this is years, if not decades. And that's really interesting from a technology and a smart community perspective, because technology development tends to be much more rapid, but these are conditions that will take a long, long time. And often the conditions that they're in is really remote. So it's not as easy to have a lot of power going to where the sensors and the gateways are sitting. This is a collaboration with soil scientists at Monash University here in Australia, as well as ecologists from Bush Heritage Australia, which is a conservation organisation that's restoring around 11.3 million acres of degraded agricultural land across Australia. So we tend to work on projects that have longer term outcomes or changes. And when we were thinking about what a smart community is, it's a really, really good question. And so we went back and we thought about how would we define a community? And basically for us, it's a group of people with a common interest. It could be board games, it could be conservation, it could be soil, or a group of people who are working towards a common goal together. If we then build upon that, what would a smart community look like? And for us, it's one that has, where members have got diverse skill sets and experiences, that it's a smart community that can communicate effectively with each other, and one that is also mindful of the impact of its actions on those who are not part of that core community that might be participating in how it's achieving its the best aim. And you'll probably notice that we haven't mentioned anything about technology in this definition, because for us, technical proficiency is just one skill set of many that are really needed to affect really impactful change in the long term. So you may be hearing some consistency or some common themes coming out from the talks of Keiko, Kalaya, and Azby so far. And what's emerging for me, at least, is that technology is just one part, but it's not the defining part. The defining part of a smart community is actually the people. And with that, viewing technology as a tool that complements all the people aspects that go into building a strong community is a really powerful way to use technology. So this allows you to be a lot more flexible in how you apply technology. And one of the things for us is that we really focus on what's appropriate technology. I think we often have access to a lot of new technology, a lot of technology that has just come out, but in some of the areas that we're working, we don't really want the latest technology because it's difficult to get spare parts into the countries that we would be working in. It's difficult to get new devices to the outback or to the deserts in Colombia. So what we want to look for is what is the most appropriate technology. And when we think about technology as a tool to build upon a bigger solution that encompasses behavioural change, social change, knowledge transfer, financial sustainability of the project, then you have a lot more flexibility to think about how you might be able to implement it. What's another interesting point for us when we think about smart communities is to think about the people in the community and how they use existing technology and what kind of technology they're using. For projects that we work on, we can't assume that everyone knows how to use platforms that we might use, Twitter, for example, or, you know, Mixi. I don't know whether Japan still uses Mixi now. But
that's like aging all of us by mentioning Mixi.
Yeah. So, but what's interesting is that people on the ground in the communities usually have a solution. They usually know what they need to do. So what are the tools that we can bring that might help them do it more easily? And it's often not the latest technology. And as I said, the timeframe for change in the projects that we work on is years, if not decades. And so when we're emphasizing the type of smart community, we try and step away from that being the same as the latest technology. So if we were to look at it, some of the things when we think about when we're kind of building communities around the projects that we're working on, we're looking at input from diverse voices, and that would be input from every person who interacts with the system or every person who's interested in the system. In the soil monitoring project, for example, we've got the end users, which include Bush Heritage, but also include the First Nations people who manage the land, to better understand from their cultural perspective how and where technology might be useful and what other kind of technology might be useful.
For those that don't know, First Nations are the indigenous Aboriginal people in Australia.
In Australia, yeah. We also work with the scientists that can inform how to interpret the data and how to extrapolate meaning from the data. And the end users, as I said, just huge amount of value, but bring them in early. So we try and bring them in really early so that they're actually part of the development cycle with us. The other thing we emphasize is knowledge exchange, and this can happen in a very formal structured way or a more informal way. So for example, we can run workshops to show people how to manage the system, how to maintain the system, but it's also in the informal kind of conversations where you start to learn about the motivations and the expertise of different people in the area. And then we focus on appropriate technology. Like I said, what is the best solution? In one project we worked on, we were in the deserts of Colombia, and there was a dam that had been built as part of a big infrastructure project. And there was a bicycle pump that basically wasn't being used. But what the local community had done was got a siphon pump over. And then right next to the bicycle pump was this amazing community sitting around, using the water from the dam, but they had come up with a technical solution themselves. So there's a lot more, people know what they want.
Well, it was also a much simpler and less technical solution that actually worked.
Yeah, and that's for example an appropriate technology that we would say. So some of the challenges that we run into, and these are kind of bigger issues when we're working with the ecologists and also the different farmers and so on, is one in particular is the human-wildlife conflict, and this is really a tricky one because it's not black and white. People that are in these situations basically want the same things that we have. They want economic stability, they want food, they want a better standard of living. And so when this comes into conflict with wildlife, for example, that might be threatened or endangered, it becomes much more grey. And so what we face as working in this area is how can we take into account both sides of the story, and how can we use our smart community metrics to try and improve conditions for both parties. So one, for example, would be with elephants, where they're raiding the farmers' crops, because we do pest deterrents too.
Oh, Jacinta, we should wrap it up pretty soon.
Oh, I could talk forever.
You have 4 minutes. No worries.
How long have I got?
You're good. You have maybe like 3 or 4 more minutes. It's no worries. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, so one challenge would be, how can we use a smart community or technology, or how could we protect the elephants and the crops if, for example, the elephants are coming to raid the crops? Okay, Rich, do you want to talk about the rest of the challenges?
Oh yeah, so actually this is our last slide, but we wanted to leave with a couple of things to think about on some of the projects that we're working on. And so Jacinta mentioned the elephants raiding the crops, the farmers killing the elephants, like there's not really a right and wrong, but also, so the next one would be like, in protecting animals from extinction, then people have created these fenced off protected reserves. But the problem is that predators and also poachers make their way into the reserves to hunt the animals. And like, I think like how would you try and reduce this? And also what kind of people or domain skills that would be needed? Like technology could help identify, but what else would you need? Would you need help for the rangers, with locals, etc.? And those are the things that we always think about. And especially for the environment, we do a lot of environmental monitoring. So for like degradation, then we're especially working hard on soil monitoring, and it's depleted due to extractive farming practices, which is basically industrial agriculture. And so eventually this runs into land that's unusable and becomes sold or abandoned. So if you want to think if you think about is there a way to prevent the depletion, but still have a functioning farm? Like, these farmers don't want to deplete their land, but they're trying to make a living. Like, what are the systemic issues that are causing this? And how would you tackle this problem? And so those are the types of things that, to broaden the picture from technology into a more system-wide view. That's generally how we end up tackling kind of the larger problems. So thank you. And I think that's it.
Great. Thank you guys so much for your presentation. That was really inspiring. Yeah, there's a lot of points that I would like to cover with that. And I appreciate you guys also kind of hitting the nail on the head with trying to define for yourselves what you think is a smart community. I think a kind of common factor that we've seen amongst the different presentations is that, it's not necessarily about the technology itself. It's about who you're putting at the forefront whenever you're deploying or researching about or trying to build your team from the very beginning. But in any event, I would like to bring back all of the speakers to the Zoom stage, so to speak, so that we might begin our crosstalk. So basically what I would like to do is I'm going to be sharing my screen to show the question that we will be asking to the speakers, just so that the audience members can also see it very well. I think that we're missing Kalaya from the Zoom.
Yeah.
Kalaya, are you okay? Oh, here we go. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for joining. Awesome. Oh, okay. So you can unspotlight me then. That's okay. Yes, great. So basically, I'm just going to share my screen very quickly. All right. So I think that maybe you guys can see this. Here we go. Loading. Great. So I think that some of you in your presentations have addressed this question kind of head on or directly, but just to kind of bring us all back to the same point about this kind of what is a smart community to you. I think that there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer to this question right now. I think there's a lot of different lenses that we can look at this word, smart, which is why we're putting it in quotation marks. I'm wondering maybe if we can just start with Keiko, since she was the first to present today. Keiko, in a few words or adjectives or verbs, however you describe, how would you define this kind of smart community?
Yeah, I think the way I kind of look at how communities are built, and I mentioned how there's a, product/consumer aspect to how communities are used today with technology, but I really think that smart communities are the ones that are able to use technology to scale the small things that influence power. And I think the three things that I mentioned, the small things are agency, access, and connection. These are things that are often tied to privilege and the things that we're able to access, because communities are really about resource distribution. It's about enabling people to access something that they otherwise cannot. And it's providing that in an organized way, less formal than a business. But I think in that sense, I think the smart communities today are really solving these problems in a way that's empowering and not necessarily just a service provider, consumer, extractive kind of dynamic. So my hope is that we're able to, use these technologies in a way to scale the small things that really just make us more human and more compassionate towards each other. That wasn't a short answer. I'm so sorry.
No, it's fantastic. It's fantastic. I appreciate it. I deeply also appreciate this perspective of trying to keep humans from becoming simple consumers or simple users of what is available in front of them and kind of empowering them to be full-fledged citizens to be able to make the action that they want to see in the world. How about Kalaya? What would you say is your impression of quote unquote smart community?
I agree with Keiko-san, and I think that it is important for people to be able to work together and then be able to do together and then make something happen if we have a good platform to empower them on that. Yes.
Excellent.
So basically,
Thank you.
my point is that it's not only about human, it might be about the platform or the system that make the things that they want to do possible. Yes.
Nice. Thank you so much. Maybe I'd like to pass the mic to Azby. Azby, what does this smart community mean for you and your perspective?
Yeah, I think I would center it on information, and again, highlighting transparency and again, access to information, and responsiveness. So timely information that helps people make decisions, and a lot of our work, and Keiko pointed this out, sometimes we find ourselves working as a counter or an opposition or trying to moderate or mediate governance and try to improve governance. So I look at it that way. And I just will point out that, I've done a lot of research and writing about the Edo period of Japan, the pre-modern period. And I would characterize the city of Edo and Edo society in general as very smart. Almost all of the guideposts or the sort of things that we look for, they had. It was a very information intensive society, very literate society, lots of information, very strict governance, but also a lot of self-reliance and a lot of self-governance at many levels. So I often look at, when we look at, the sort of technologically based proposals for smart cities, I often look at them and say, well, what would this do better than was done in this other way, very human-centered, very, individual, small-scale level. So actually, I think, technology will help us, but as we're saying time and time and again, it's not about the technology.
That's a really fascinating point that you bring up, especially about Edo period, I think. I think that a lot of folks maybe sometimes forget to look back into history because maybe these concepts are not necessarily new or futuristic or utopian or something like this. It's quite possible that we can find really excellent patterns of smart community in our own history. So I deeply appreciate that point. Just going in order of the folks on my screen, Jacinta, what do you think about this concept of smart community?
I think one of the things that we see in our projects is when people can adapt the technology for their own purposes, it becomes really, really powerful. And so understanding how the technology works, being able to change, modify, customize, and repair is another key aspect that I think is within the sort of smart community, because that's where I think the ownership and the agency that Keiko was talking about also comes from.
Nice. Thank you so much. How about you, Akiba? What do you think?
I think that a smart community is actually like you need a diverse skill set in it. So like rather than having like say a smart community as a technology community, I think a smart community would actually have, a lot of different people with different skills tackling like in a single-minded, like in a unified way, tackling a problem. And I think Jacinta and I learned a lot from when we had helped start Tokyo Hackerspace, in that, like I really liked Keiko's discussion about resource sharing. So because we started a community in Tokyo to share tools and resources. That was Tokyo Hackerspace. But the thing was that it was mainly focused on technology. So we actually have a lot of experience with very technical communities, and the problem is that you just end up arguing over the finer details of technology. So whereas I think we really, now we're working on larger problems like that, like with the World Bank or UNESCO, and they work on like poverty and illegal dumping and things like that. And technology has very limited impact because you need to understand the people, the political, a lot of people are just trying to live their lives. So I think so a smart community, I think, would be very diverse, not just in skills, but also in experiences, genders, just so that's what I think. So.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. And you bring up this excellent point, I think, as well, about talking about, how should I say, the kind of nitpickiness that can happen between people with high skills. And whenever at the end of the day, people are just trying to create the better world for themselves and their neighbors, which is a point I think Keiko was also bringing up before. Whenever she's talking about community, it's you and your neighbors. So I think that's also a kind of interesting discussion around belonging, for example. So I'd like to go ahead and go to the next question. Oh, let me see if there we go. I know that we can go on this question for a very long time, but just off the top of your heads, do you have any questions for each other? I saw the chat had some interesting, things coming up. Does anybody have any kind of burning question or comment towards each other's presentations? I'll open up the conversation.
I was like, I have a question for Keiko, because I think Keiko's like running some kind of interesting community project out in the countryside, and I'd like to know more about that. But I think but that might be off topic. So
I'm happy to answer really quickly, but I just wanted to kind of point to Azby-san's book, which I realize I should get a copy of. But I think what I felt during COVID is that people were incredibly vulnerable if you didn't have a strong community and if you didn't have diversified assets. And there's so much research that looks at the power of human connections and how that affects your lifespan and general happiness. I think we can all kind of attest to that in our workspaces, in our universities, etc. But COVID in particular, I think, was really interesting because I think, just made me realize how vulnerable you can be when you don't have a strong community. My project in Nagano is looking at real estate in Japan. And I think there's a lot that I'd hope to learn from Azby and Akiba, but basically everybody knows about the Akiba problem and the rural kind of revitalization initiatives that everybody and anybody's trying to kind of tackle. But what I'm interested in is trying to find ways of making real estate accessible so that people can learn more about nature, as well as have better connections to each other and diversify what finances they're able to generate. So we all know how Airbnb is received in different countries. And there's basically one of Japan's largest villa estates, which nobody knows about in Nagano, that is also on protected land. And I just thought, my goodness, this is an hour or two away from Tokyo. And, I would never be able to purchase the property by myself. But I also felt that, whenever you're doing anything as a group, there's a huge learning curve. And I think there's also, when we talk about smart communities, there's also aspects around distributing risk and also just learning together when you're doing something new. But the project in Nagano is really trying to look at how can we try to create ways to make real estate more accessible to everyday people, so that you're not having to wait until you retire. And I think, the crux of this is kind of looking at capitalism and resource distribution. I really do feel like we're at a turning point. And we have a really great opportunity to think about how can we work together to kind of have better access to things that are traditionally restricted. I know my train of thought is a bit all over the place, but another thing that inspired that project is the fact that a lot of the media companies within Japan, and for anybody who's aware about how that works in Japan, we have the highest newspaper circulation in the world, which I find really interesting. We still use Yahoo and, all these interesting things about how information is shared. But what finances major media companies is actually real estate. It's not actually the subscription. And so for me, I think, just imagining what could a future look like where you're able to take these financial streams and channel it into alternative media outlets, I think is really exciting and interesting. And as you can tell, this is when we were talking about communities and how do you manage different stakeholders, this is one where things are moving and changing every time, because it's very much like a cooperative. We all have equal ownership and I think that's part of the fun of community building, and the challenge is that you never know what's going to happen in the next 2 months. But I think, the spirit of trying to do something new is also something that, communities can help people with, versus if you were to do something on your own. That was a really long-winded explanation, but I'm happy to talk to that more.
Actually, if there's time, Kelsey, I have a question just generally. I mean, Akiba and I talk about this a lot, so maybe for Azby, Keiko and Kalaya. Sorry, Akiba. But what we haven't really touched upon is the interpersonal management, how you manage communities so that they are able to resolve differences, so that they're able to bring up sensitive topics of discussion, how you manage basically arguments, how you manage different points of views, the interpersonal skills. So I'd be curious to hear people's experience of that in building smart communities, because that's huge.
Yeah.
Azby?
Maybe I'll talk about it, because so Safecast is going for 10 years, and as Akiba pointed out, he was there at the beginning and very involved in a lot of the important designs, and still part of the network, and still, et cetera. But it's basically a sort of consensus-based decision-making group on the one hand, but we also have an official board. We have an official, there's a sort of a hierarchy, and some people simply, by virtue of their, investment of time and energy, et cetera, perhaps their opinions take a greater weight. So it's not really democratic, but nothing works without the consensus, but it can be very, very chaotic. And actually, Keiko showed these matrices of decisions and stuff, which we've never done. It again, just sort of juggling things and staying in touch. And I found that our organization requires people who are sort of connectors. They're not like a tech lead on one of these or, other projects. And that was something I think I ended up doing a lot when I became involved, was somebody checking with people and how are people doing, and sort of being a diplomat, an in-house diplomat. And I will appreciate that actually Kelsey's pretty good at that too, just sort of finding out what's going on, and, are you happy with that? Are you not happy with that? And sort of helping to smooth the communication. And this is part of balancing the desires and needs of stakeholders. And as I mentioned, we have sort of these, let's say it's like an onion with rings of greater or lesser involvement. There's people, again, who we never hear from, but every now and then someone will email and say, hey, I'm having trouble with this, can you help us out? And we're going, who is this person, And we try to deal with them and answer that, as quickly as possible. But it's difficult. The interpersonal things can be very difficult. Having a strict hierarchy with a boss makes a lot of things easier. And again, we're a volunteer organization, primarily. Some people are getting paid for some tasks, but it's a volunteer thing. And you can't fire anybody. And you can't give anybody a bonus, right? So what is the motivation? It becomes intangibles: appreciation, satisfaction. And the appreciation thing and the acknowledgement is really, really big. And I learned a lot how important that is. Like, I'm writing a lot of blogs and things to point out, hey, so-and-so did something cool, this volunteer got this data from Ukraine, that's really important. So
I also just want to say that, like, Azby, you've taken Safecast to like a lot, like to new heights. So, I'm proud to have been involved in the genesis of it, even though I'm not very involved right now. So yeah.
Your DNA and fingerprint is everywhere, though. It's everywhere, and particularly because of your commitment, both you and Jacinta, to open source solutions and making tools, making electronic components, all that stuff. A lot of which I think we still use. So it's essential. And again, the elasticity is part of it. And there's other. I mean, I spaced out on Colleen's name when I was showing the picture at Hackerspace with Joe and Colleen. Again, Colleen's another person who's come in and gone out and come in and gone out. And the other thing I'll point out about Safecast, it was like a team of stars kind of a thing. Like, everybody who was involved was like the boss of their own organization, the top, and it's like an all-star team. And so you get frictions from that. People are used to having their way, and you get friction. So at the other hand, most people put the project ahead of their personal desires. And I think Keiko points that out, and I think Akiba points that out, Jacinta points this out. If you, and also Kalaya, if you have a project that people think is really important, they're more likely to sort of put a lid on their own egos, and this can lead to really, really great accomplishments. So it's tricky, it's ongoing, it's an incredible juggle, but it requires a lot of diplomacy and certain temperaments among people who are doing that.
Mm.
I might.
Oh, sorry,
go
go.
ahead,
Oh,
Akiba.
please go.
Super quickly, but I think just to Azby's point about the decision-making matrix, that actually came a very long time away after we had kind of matured into a specific stage. And I just typed it into the chat, but I think two things that felt really powerful to keep in mind when managing these interpersonal things is we're really just juggling agency. So on the one hand, how do you manage acknowledging people? Is it a like on their post? Is it a quick message? Like, again, when I talked about small things at scale, it's really about telling somebody, I see you and I hear you. And then the second thing is on decision making. And this is where it can be hard to make a balance between top down and bottom up kind of structures when you have a volunteer-based organization, is how much influence do you want to provide people? Because when you provide that influence and that decision-making power, it's also tied to responsibilities. So, for I'd love to hear about the communities that, within this group, people are organizing. My past with like community building really comes from being a student. So I'd love to kind of hear how that's been working in your own experience as well. But I think those two things have been really helpful to keep in mind when managing interpersonal stuff, which is always fun.
Yeah, I think that maybe, so I'd like to call a little bit on Kalaya as well. I know that, for example, in Farm Hack, Kalaya is working with local farmers who may or may not see any issue or problem with just, doing things as, normal, meaning like what is the reason to change the way that I've been doing things for the last 20, 30, 40 years? What are the real values to me, and how can you explain it to me in a way that as a farmer makes sense at the end of the day? It doesn't seem to make sense just to come from the top and say, hey, use this technology, use this sensors, you might be able to make more money or maybe not, we're not actually sure yet. What I'd like to direct to Kalaya is this question about how do you approach your hackathons, for example, with Farm Hack, to do exactly what Keiko is saying. First, show them that they are seen, show them that they are heard, and then also show them that they have the influence to make decisions. They have the power to make decisions. What has your experience with that, for example, through Farm Hack?
Normally, anything related to social, we will do the field trip, like field research first. So we have to listen to them whether what we think is really a problem at all. Yeah, because like recently we tried to help the sea salt farmers in Thailand, and then we thought that okay, because the technology, the system that they use for the sea salt farm is very like very old way of doing it. So we try to do the research about like how other people around the world changing it, improve it, and then we create the solution and then try to introduce them to this one. But before we showing them that, we need to check them whether this is like the good hypothesis, the good approach that we need to work with them first. Yeah. So like, do they need technology at all? Or maybe they need something else, like for sea salt farmer, at the end, we found out that they really need government to like create some kind of like agency to taking care of the sea salt people and the quality of the sea salt first. Yeah, that is very important because many regulation doesn't support them at all. So that is like the major problem for them. And then for the climate change, that we thought that it affects their products. It happens that actually the sea salt doesn't sell well. So they still have sea salt like 3 years ago in their warehouse. So they prefer to try to find someone to use it. Yeah. So that's why they didn't interested in their how to create a better sea salt farm. But later one the regulations and how to create the sea salt value.
Nice. Excellent point. Excellent point. Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned about having the 3 years surplus of sea salt, because we're not just dealing with the issues of right now, the present, but issues that have been happening for potentially years. So yeah, these kind of field trips becomes really important to find that, how should I say, real life situation on the ground that you might not be able to find if you just search about it on the internet, for example. That's a really good point. Nice. So I have a little bit more time if you want to ask each other a particular question. And then after that, I have one more question before we go out into the Q&A breakout rooms. Does anyone have any particular question that they'd like to ask each other? You guys are good? Okay, great. So the next, okay, thank you. Awesome. I've got my Zoom master sitting across from me, getting me cues and all kinds of fun stuff to make us have a nice smooth journey for this talk event. So the next question that I have, here we go, sorry. I'd like to go ahead and skip to this question. So basically, a majority of the people who are joining our talk event today are also going to be joining our mini jam tomorrow. It's going to be a half day from 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. Japan Standard Time. We're going to be using Zoom and Miro board to make teams to try to tackle the individual challenges that are important to the team members. And I think that in order to kind of segue from this crosstalk session into the breakout rooms for question and answer, maybe the speakers can give some kind of information about, what are the questions that you have for, the people who have been kind enough to join us today, in this Zoom. I know that the questions, are always going towards the speakers, but as speakers, do you have any questions for the audience members of today? Maybe we can start with Azby.
If you mean in terms of just sort of general and possibly rhetorical questions.
That's also good.
I guess I would encourage you to think, to ask, what do you hope to accomplish? And, who is your community? The big question is, who is it for? Whatever it is you're trying to do, who is it for? And I will just add onto this because in our experience, we've often been approached for projects or to work together by organizations or sometimes individuals who possibly see our project as a step for them, I would say to instrumentalize it. In other words, maybe they want to make money, maybe they have a political aim, maybe they have some other agenda, and they think that maybe we can help them move that along. In other words, it's not necessarily for the people that we think really, need the help and need the information. So I guess I would ask, who is it for? Who is the community? And who's the focus of the people that you're hoping to help? On the other hand, if you really want to do it as a business and you're thinking of this as a career step on the move, that's okay, but be clear about that. Right? And I would say try not to use the language of social empowerment to camouflage, let's just say, commercial or financial ends. Anyway, who's it for?
Thank you. I appreciate that. Jacinta, how about you? Do you have any particular questions or comments towards the participants before we jump into breakout rooms?
Yeah, I would say, building on what Azby was saying, what kind of team or community or atmosphere do you want to work in? Often the work sounds really glamorous and it's not. And that's when people really make it enjoyable and motivate and keep you going when you're doing really, really, really mundane things. So I would think a little bit about the atmosphere, the kind of things that you enjoy when you're working with people and how you might create that, as well as tying in with what Azby was saying about who's it for as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you bring in a good point about motivation. I noticed that in your presentation, you're not simply talking about environmental conservation data gathering efforts, but you're also doing work in games and dancing. And so, I think it's great to have this kind of blend where you can, if you get burnt out on one side, you can also look at the other side and find new motivation and then come back and, try again. So that's really great.
And you'd be really surprised because sometimes the issues get very heavy. It's really like, whoo. And so it's really nice to add in a little bit of, there's also this. But also what we see with that diversity of projects is that things feed into one another. So one of the devices that attaches to a camera trap for wildlife researchers is actually based on the board game technology. So there's some really nice, fun crossovers there that you wouldn't plan for.
Nice. Cool. How about you, Kalaya? Do you have any questions or comments for the people who have joined us today?
I would say that continue from what Azby already asked them is that they need to know who they want to work to help. And then for me, I would like for them to go outside and then talk to that people. Yeah, to gain insights as much as possible, because I know that it's easier to just sit in the room and then Google it or maybe just like call it or Zoom with them. But it's better to like see the environment that they are into and then what is caused, the relationship between the problem that create. Yeah, so it's important to go outside.
Nice. I'm just making some notes about this one. Nice. Thank you. How about Akiba? What do you think?
I think that like the question that I would have, or the question that I'd recommend you guys ask would be, what is the purpose of the community you're trying to create in the most specific way possible? And the last part is really important because Jacinta and I had made that mistake many times. So when we helped create Tokyo Hackerspace, it was a very kind of general technology community. We want a community where we can share tools and stuff like that. But actually, it was just kind of aimlessly wandering around and playing with like different technologies. And then so we started Hacker Farm, which was technology in the context of agriculture. And so actually there's more focus in there. We did a lot of agriculture projects, but then, some people moved into more of the food processing and cooking. Some people moved more into the agriculture, and some people just went off into left field and just became like a homesteader. So I think that's actually best in order to conserve your time and energy to be very specific in the community that you create initially, and then have it naturally broaden out in the directions that it'll kind of go, and you'll never be able to predict it.
Nice. Yeah, I think. Oh, please go ahead, Azby.
One thing, yeah, and this Akiba mentioned, what do you say, playing around kind of attitude. The spirit of play is important. I mean, we're talking about how to do this stuff and how important it is, and just understand about how it can get heavy, and all that's true. But the spirit of play is really important. Give yourself the mental freedom to joke around and to have lighthearted activity, to be social, to have parties, to do that stuff. And we found, in terms of like Fukushima and the radiation disaster, there's lots of groups that, grew up, citizen groups, to monitor radiation and to deal with the issues. And most of them are very dark, dark. It's such a big problem, about the children kind of a thing. And very few of them still exist. And Safecast attitude was a lot of humor, joking constantly, always taking it seriously, but always understanding that humanly, we need to be able to let off steam and approach things with a sense of humor. So I encourage people to approach it playfully as well as seriously.
But there were a lot of dark radiation jokes back during the the Fukushima Daiichi times.
And there are Chernobyl now as well. There's so many means really dark jokes, but that's important. Black humor is important. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And we also have a previous comedian as president of Ukraine as well. So I think that, some things these things are happening in our world and in our governments. Keiko, I think that you touched upon this very eloquently in your presentation as well about what kind of things we can do to encourage people to have these healthy, resilient, smart communities. But I'd like to give you another chance to maybe, ask some questions to the participants or make some comments towards them. What do you think?
Yeah, I think maybe this might be tied a little bit to the mental health aspect and like just the intrarelational things about building communities. But my question to you all would be to, do a little audit of all of the communities you've been a part of up until now. It could be formal or informal. And by that, I mean groups of friends or like clubs or internships with companies that you've worked with, or even your university. And I'd want you to kind of list out the beliefs or the patterns that you see emerging from your choosing to be involved in these groups, because one thing that I think is really powerful about community work is that you will learn so much more about yourself, and having a clear understanding of your own beliefs kind of helps you navigate difficult conversations of things that you feel are non-negotiable and things that you feel you could learn more about and share. And if you want to do a bit of research on it, I've learned a lot from researching from the Gottman Institute, which kind of looks at intrapersonal and interpersonal skills, and just, how much compassion plays into this whole space of community building. But yeah, I'd be curious to hear about the patterns that you find and the beliefs that you feel have guided your journey with community work up until today.
So the memo that I'm taking is kind of a little bit paraphrasing what you were speaking of just now, but yeah, I was very touched whenever at the beginning of your presentation, you were showing this kind of life journey that you had from being a member of a student union to now. And I think that there are a lot of students in the audience today, and it's, I think it's also very interesting that we have Atelier Future as one of the organizers of today's event, because I think that they're also trying to create this platform, this space, this exceedingly openingly, like encouraging, place for students to come and explore things for themselves or in teams with mentors, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you so much, you guys, for all of this. It's now approaching 5 p.m. Japan Standard Time, so we're actually kind of perfectly on time. Thank you so much for that. So from now, I think that our Zoom master has prepared us to go into the breakout rooms. So you have now been invited to go into the breakout rooms. We will see you there, and I look forward to hearing all your questions. Thank you. I think everybody has come back to the main Zoom room. Is that right, Zoom master? Excellent. Okay, welcome back, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you all back to the main room, and thank you so much for the enlightening question and answer session. In the last one that I was just involved in, I was hearing some interesting terms come into play about circular economy, regenerative design, thinking about the design process from the very beginning, about what is going to be the life cycle of those things that you're creating, and about how the smart community can kind of support that new way of thinking about creation or making in and of itself. So it was really nice turn of conversation for me. So I think that we just have a couple minutes left before the end of our session today. I'm wondering if there's any speakers who want to say a few words or point out any interesting questions that they heard in their breakout room. Keiko, you're right here in front of me on the screen. So Keiko, do you have any points or questions that you would like to highlight from your last breakout session?
Yeah, I think I'll keep it really short. I feel like there's a lot of us talking to people, so I'm really excited to hear more from everybody in the audience tomorrow. I think in the last group, Juliana and Claire shared that they're kind of getting ready for a competition later this year, and I think that got me really excited to talk more, but I'll hold that for tomorrow. So thanks everybody, and thanks Kelsey for organizing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. How about you, Akiba? Oh, I know you guys are in the same room, but do you have anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think I really like the question that was asked about like when you go into a rural community and you have this suite of technology tools and you try and solve their problems, and how to do it when like maybe the rural community will reject you. And I think that brings it brings up a common issue that we run into in our international development. So when we work with World Bank, we go into like developing countries, and we can't go in and we can't go in as we're going to save you, we're going to bring these technology tools. I think it's more about observation and trying to understand what the larger problem is, because normally each problem isn't so one-dimensional where it's just like kind of, if they can get water, then their problems will be solved. It's systemic, like who's going to pay for the water, who's going to pay for the like the transport of the water, will it be a tax, etc. And then you have to start getting into the politics and the government. And I think that's a really interesting question. And I think also the question that Keiko mentioned was actually a real life scenario where two of the women that were involved in our breakout room had a problem that, like, they solved the technology problem, but were then running into all the problems after that, like how to get the word out, how to get people to adopt it, etc.
Nice. Thanks so much. One last person I'd like to call on before we kind of close today's session. Leslie, do you have any comments or insights or questions that you thought were particularly insightful from your last breakout session or about today's contents in general?
I think personally, to start I would be very honest about, I think this is the first time that we were trying to outreach and engage to the other smart communities just globally to really understand that to the potential or the challenges that Atelier Future is going to face in the upcoming maybe 1 to 3 years. And from all this really insightful and really truthfully sharing that, I just feel like maybe each one of ourselves really has to start small, but still to have the ability to think big, to really face the actual problems without inventing the problems itself. Sometimes to fit into our interests, that's we always tend to invent a certain demand or a certain unmet needs, and that sometimes become maybe and for a lot of actual engagement projects that we have been executing, and also just to have all these actions on campus, that the outreach sometimes tend to be only about experience itself, to have a field trip, to have a certain visits to those, maybe to rural areas, to local. But how we can really turn all those experience and all those questions in mind into the community, and to adopt a certain like skill set or technology to turn yourself into a problem solver. That's a challenge for us, and for me, myself, and for all the participants to really engage, and also to start thinking that's what kind of change that can start by you.
Agreed. Thank you so much for those comments. I think Kalaya also has one last thing to mention as well, to share another tip. Kalaya?
Thank you, Kelsey. So from the 2 room that I joined, I like 3D printer on the melanin project. I think both of you will be struggle to ask people to like adopt your interventions. So I would just suggest you that instead of saying that you would like to help them, just ask them to help you instead. And then that way you will gain the collaboration from that communities, and then they are willing to help you with the project because you are sincere to them, and then they feel more important that to work with you. Yes. So try this. If your project is very high tech or is far ahead of the present world, I think that it's better to tell them straight that you would like to test the idea, and then you will need their collaborations to make it happen. And then, yeah, we need the help.
That's really excellent point. And it's also another point that I think connects us to tomorrow, which is, you know, sometimes whenever we're developing these solution ideas, we're not quite digging deep enough into the challenge itself. So we have this wonderful idea and we try to put it out into the world, but we've been talking about this entire conversation, who is this idea for? What are they thinking? What do they need? Have you spoken to them enough? Have you gotten them on your team? And have you put them, the people who are going to eventually be using these solutions or be affected or affecting these solutions, at the forefront of your innovation process? So actually, I think that maybe not everybody in the audience today is joining the mini jam tomorrow, but for those of you who are joining us for the mini jam tomorrow, I would like to try to ask you, you know, tonight as you're digesting this, you know, hopefully you're going to be reviewing your notes before you go to sleep. Just kidding. But, you know, you'll be thinking about what you heard about, you know, at today's event. And I would really appreciate it if you thought deeply about, you know, what kind of insight from your personal or professional or student life can you bring to the table to inform you about the challenge that you and your team decide on? Because at the end of the day, we have our experience and we have the perspectives that we see around us, the research that we're doing ourselves. But for the motivation of yourself and for the insight, the pure insight, you know, think deeply about the challenge which is important to you, the challenge that you really want to tackle, and everybody involved in that stakeholder map. I would like to ask you a small homework for tonight to think about this, because it's actually going to be the first step of our design sprint sessions for tomorrow, which is the 5W1H, the who, what, when, how, where, why, and how might we, and then your design question. So please start considering this, you know, even before we join tomorrow. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the really interesting challenges and also solutions that we come up with tomorrow. And with that, we're about 6 minutes over time. So apologies for keeping you over time. I try to be, you know, good about this timing thing, but thank you so much for sticking around with us until the end of today. And we appreciate all of the guest speakers. Thank you again to all the guest speakers, to NCKU, to Atelier Future for hosting this event together with Loftwork and FabCafe Global. And with that, I would like to draw today's event to a close.